Picking up where we left off at, we have 3x over 5 plus 2/3 is equal to x over 3. Now there's another way of solving this problem as opposed to the way I showed you how to solve a fraction problem on the last video. What we could do is this here, since this is an equation, we can look at and find the common denominators of these fractions. The common denominator of 5 and 3 is 15. So we would multiply everything by 15 over 1. 15 times 3x will give us 45x, and 1 times 5 is 5. Plus 15 times 2/3 will give us 30 over 3. 15 times x is 15x, and 1 times 3 is 3. 45 divided by 5 is 9. Bring down our x. Plus 30 divided by 3 is 10. Is equal to 15x divided by 3 is 5x. Now, if you notice, we got rid of all of the fractions. That is the purpose of multiplying everything by the common denominator. Now we need to get all the x's on one side. So we will subtract 9x on both sides. And we will have 10 is equal to a negative 4x. Now, I'm going to carry that here because of lack of space. Now we'll divide each side by negative 4, as we're trying to isolate x by itself. Now 10 and 4 both has 2 in common. So we'll divide both of these values by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So this is the final answer, negative 5/2. Now we have this example. Responding to negative life events. Sense of humor and depression. Well, reading this graph, we have sense of humor and depression. It says the group's average level of depression in response to negative life events. This is what this y-axis is here. And the x-axis is basically the degree, the intensity of negative life event. Now, it says these graphs indicate that persons with a low sense of humor have higher levels of depression. These graphs can be modeled by the following formulas. Now we have the low humor group, have this formula here, and the high humor group, and we have this formula here. In each formula, x represents the intensity of a negative life event, from 1, which is low, to 10, which is high. And D is the average level of depression in response to that event. If the high humor group averages a level of depression of 3.5 or 7/2 in response to a negative life event, what is the intensity of the event? Okay, so we need to take the high humor group equation. We will have D is equal to 1/9 x plus 26 over 9. Now remember, this 3.5 or the 7.5 represents D. So since we have fractions here, I would suggest that we work with fractions. So let's substitute in 7/2 for D. And that'll equal 1/9 x plus 26 over 9. Now, what we need to do is what we did in the last problem. We want to find a common denominator of 2 and 9, which is 18. So we can multiply everything by 18 over 1. Now, if we do some cross simplifying, this will make it a little easier. If we cross simplify 2 with 18, 2 goes into 18 9 times, and 9 times 7 will give us 63. 9 goes into 18 twice, and 2 times 1x is 2x. 9 goes into 18 twice, and 2 times 26 is 52. Now we need to get x by itself, so we can subtract 52 on both sides. 63 minus 52 is 11, and that equals 2x. We can divide each side by 2, and our final answer is 11/2 is equal to x. And that is our final answer. It'll be 11/2. Now we must remember that this 11/2 represents the intensity level. So we come down here, and this also shows the solution. It says we are interested in the intensity of a negative life event with an average level of depression of 7/2 for the high humor group, which is what we did. We substituted in 7/2 for D, and we found the common denominator and multiplied it out. And this also shows the equation, the final answer of the equation. So the formula indicates that if the high humor group averages a level of depression of 3.5, well, we use 7. You just put 7/2, which is 3.5. In response to a negative life event, the intensity of that event is 11/2 or 5.5. This is illustrated on the line graph for the high humor group. We must remember that our x is 5.5, so we go to 5.5, and if we go up, this is approximately 5.5. And when we go up here, we will be almost at 3.5, which is basically what our answer was. Now we move on to ratios. A ratio compares quantities by division. For example, a group consists of 60 women and 20 men. The ratio of women to men is 60 divided by 20. Reduced to the lowest term, this is 3 divided by 1. This can be expressed as a ratio of 3:1 or 3:1. Now this is the number of divorced persons per 1,000 of married persons. And this here is the years. So now it says find the ratio of the number of divorced people for every 1,000 married people in 2000 to the number in 1980. So we will go here, the year 2000, which would be 180. And then it says to 1980. So 1980 is 100. So we'll have 180 for the year 2000, and 1980 would be 100. Now we could simplify that. If we look here, we could divide both of these by 20, both of these values, and this would give us 9/5. So our answer here would be 9/5. Now we can rewrite this as 9/5, or we could write 9 to 5, or we could write 9:5. Now here we have the example of the answer. It says the ratio would be 9/5. So it looks as though we would stop just at the fraction. But these are also acceptable answers. Now example, the batting average of a baseball player is the ratio of the player's hits to his times at bat. If a player gets 72 hits and 312 at bats, what is his batting average? So what we would do is this here. It's the player's hits to his times at bat. So it'll be 72 hits divided by 312 at bats. Now we need to simplify that. Now we set the problem up, so now we could take a look at the solution here. Remember, it's 72 over 312, which we have here, and we could simplify this to 3/13. Now, the fraction is usually expressed as a decimal or 231 hits per 1,000 at bat. Now think about it like this. Whenever you see baseball, if you follow the sport, when they give these averages, they always have them as decimals. So it was expected that your final answer should be at a decimal because it's a batting average. And typically averages are written as decimals. So now we go on to proportions. A proportion is a statement that two ratios are equal. If the ratios are A over B and C over D, then a proportion is A over B equals C over D. To solve a proportion, use the following principle. Cross product principle for proportions. If A over B is equal to C over D, then A times D is equal to B times C. And B is not equal to 0 and D is not equal to 0. And the reason being is it would most likely make these fractions undefined. the cross products AD and BC. Example, solve the proportion and then check the answer. So we would do the proportion here. We would take 45 times 10. So we have 45 times 10. And then it will be equal to x times 9. Now 45 times 10 is 450. And x times 9 is 9x. Now we would divide each side by 9. $450 divided by 9 is 50. And it equals 9 divided by 9 is 1 times x is x. So your final answer here would be 50. Now, we scroll down to our next example. It says solve the proportion and then check the answer. Okay, so we would do our cross multiplication. We would have 15 times x is equal to, now we cross multiply x plus 12, and we will multiply that times 3. So 15 times x is 15x, and we would take 3 and multiply it by everything inside the parentheses. 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times 12 is 36. Now you know we just used the distributive property, so now we need to get the x's on one side. So we will subtract 3x on both sides. 15x minus 3x is 12x, and that equals 36. Divide each side by 12, and x is 3. And that is your final answer. Now we come to our next example. It says solve the proportion and then check the answer. Okay, this time we will go through the process of checking the answer as well. So we will cross multiply 24 times 7 and then c times 12. 24 times 7 is 168, and that equals to 12 times c, which is 12c. Now we will divide each side by 12, and we will have 168 divided by 12 is 14, and that equals to c. Now we want to go through and check this. So what we would do is we would go back to the original problem and substitute in 14 for c. Now if you notice here, we could simplify 24 and 14. You divide both by 2, and that will give you 12 over 7 equals 12 over 7. So this is correct. Okay, now we move on to the next problem. We have another example. So we will cross multiply. We will add x times 4 is equal to 6 times 18. Now x times 4 we know is 4x, and 6 times 18 is 108. We divide each side by 4, and x is 36. Made a slight error here. This should be 27, not 36. So x is 27. So now we will go through and substitute. Let's check this problem as well. We'll put in 27 for x is equal to 18 over 4. And we can simplify both of these. 27 and 6 both has 3 in common. So this will give us 9 halves. And 18 and 4 both has 2 in common. So that will give us 9 halves. So x equals 27 is your answer. Now we move on to the next problem. We do our cross multiplication. Negative 3 times 40 will give us negative 120 is equal to 8 times x, which is 8x. Now we'll divide each side by 8. Negative 120 divided by 8 should give us negative 15, which is x. Now you can check this problem at your leisure, but this is the final answer. Now we scroll to the next problem. We do cross multiplication. X times 5 is equal to 7 times x plus 14. X times 5 is 5x, Then we use the distributive property to finish off this parenthesis.